Very little Cinderella. Very little Cinderella was cleaning the house. I clean it all up, she said. She cleaned the floor. She cleaned the walls. She cleaned the table. Soon everything was looking very clean. The ugly sisters crashed in. Very little Cinderella, they said. Can you please clean up? No, said very little Cinderella. Cleaning all done. But, said the ugly sisters. No, said very little Cinderella. Cleaning all done. Now I have cookie. Suddenly, the fairy godmother appeared. Who's she? Said very little Cinderella. I'm the babysitter, said the fairy godmother. You see, said the ugly sisters, we're off to a party. I go too? Asked very little Cinderella. No, said the ugly sisters, just us. But I do go, said very little Cinderella. We'll be back after midnight, said the ugly sisters. Be good, sleep tight. And off they went, quickly. Very little Cinderella was very upset. It's not fair, she wailed. I not stay here. I want to go too. The fairy godmother took a deep breath. Why don't we have a snack, she said, after we clean this all up? Then the fairy godmother whispered, Listen, why don't we go to the party too? You'll need a special dress. I like that, said very little Cinderella. I want my blue dress. Well, it must be special, said the fairy godmother. What about a shiny dress, a bright dress, a tiny dress, a tight dress, a puffy, fluffy, cozy, rosy, dreamy, creamy white dress, a sweet dress, a curly dress, a neat dress, a pearly dress, a frilly, silly, crazy, daisy, flashy, splashy, twirly dress. Or what about, said the fairy godmother, with one last effort, a silver dress. I want my blue dress, said very little Cinderella firmly, and my stripy hat, my froggy coat, and my yellow boots. Well, you should at least go in a coach. I can magic you one from these rats in this pumpkin, said the fairy godmother. Oh no, said very little Cinderella. I go on my big blue scooter. So they went to the party on the big blue scooter. We must leave at midnight, said the fairy godmother. Very little Cinderella ran into the party. I do dancing, she said. She leapt and she jumped. She hopped and she bumped. She swished and she swirled. She swooshed and she twirled. She found a friend and another and another. But then the clock struck 12. It's midnight. Come on. Time to go home, said the fairy godmother. No, said very little Cinderella. I stay here. I do more dancing. And I lost my yellow boot. I'll magic you some new boots, said the fairy godmother. But we have to go now. And she took very little Cinderella home on the big blue scooter. I need my yellow boot. The next day, very little Cinderella was feeling very sad. The ugly sisters tried a cookie. They tried a balloon. The fairy godmother tried a big basket of boots. But nothing worked. My bestest boot is all gone, said very little Cinderella. But just then, there was a knock at the door. There stood a very little prince with his mommy. My best boot, said very little Cinderella. Is this your boot? He said. It is a very nice boot, and she gave the boot a big hug. Then very little Cinderella noticed something. "Oh," she said, "you got boots too." "Oh yes," said the very little prince. "I got spots all over on mine. Shall we have a try on?" said very little Cinderella. So very little Cinderella tried on the very little prince's boot. The very little prince tried on very little Cinderella's boot. "It fits me," they said. And very little Cinderella and the very little prince had a play date. They laughed and chased, they wrestled and raced. And they both played happily ever after. The end.